Israelis and Jewish communities around the world are holding somber ceremonies to mark a year since the deadliest attack in the country's history. The Hamas-led raid shattered Israel's sense of security and ignited wars on two fronts with no end in sight after the October 7th attack. Hamas, meanwhile, marked the day by firing a barrage of rockets at Tel Aviv. Manisa Denabalin joins us now with more. Manisa.
Emily, it's been a year, and while there were attempts to implement a ceasefire, those efforts have ground to a halt. Meanwhile, Gaza is in ruins after Israel's year-long offensive, and experts say rebuilding it may take decades. A year after the Israel-Hamas war began, the Gaza Strip is in ruins. There are hills of rubble where apartment blocks stood and pools of sewage tainted water spreading disease. City streets have been churned into dirt canyons, and in many places, the air is filled with the stench of unrecovered bodies. A woman who lost several family members returned to where her 5-year-old niece was buried after Israel began its military offensive on Gaza. She says there is no hope. We lost all hope in everything. We were following each news item in case there was good news for the war to end, but it was for nothing.
And many of these children, they arrived dead. So unfortunately, I thought in the first medical mission, probably that will be the worst that I've ever seen in any war zone. But the second mission was even worse. So, after now a year, things are not getting better. Massacres, killing, shelling.
Israel's year-long offensive against Hamas, one of the deadliest and most destructive in recent history, has killed more than 41,000 people. More than 16,000 of them were children, according to health officials in Gaza.
Even children who escaped the attacks, the airstrikes, they're suffering from malnutrition. Every single kid comes to our ER at Nasser Complex Hospital when I was there in August of this year. Obviously has malnutrition. They're skin on bone, they're very weak, fatigue, and many of them, they have hepatitis, right? Because there's no, hygiene.
Experts warn that the children who survive also have to endure a lifetime of trauma. Satellite images showed the scale of destruction in Gaza's Rafah and Khan Yunis camps from before and during the current conflict in the territory. Today, many displaced in Khan Yunis were on the move once again after orders from the Israeli army. Meanwhile, protests were held around the world today to show solidarity with Gazans, as calls continue for a ceasefire. Talks came to a halt, and there's speculation that it may not resume anytime soon with the rising conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, some saying it may even take until after the U.S. election. Today, Israeli armed forces struck Gaza with airstrikes and artillery. Military activity and fighting on the ground could be seen in the devastated Palestinian enclave. Meanwhile, Hamas said it struck Israel's commercial capital, Tel Aviv, with a missile, setting off sirens in central Israel.
They managed to land rockets in a central community where the rocket hit right outside of the front door of this family's home. Unfortunately, there were 2 individuals who were lightly injured.
If the war comes to an end, experts say it'll take a long time to rebuild Gaza, where many are displaced and living in tents after their homes were destroyed. Emily?
Thanks, Manisa. Fighting continues across the region with strikes in Gaza, Israel, and Lebanon today. With more on where this conflict could be heading, we're joined by Michael Pregent, a former U.S. intelligence officer with over 28 years of experience and senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Michael, concerns of a wider regional conflict have escalated in recent days, namely with Lebanon and Iran. Where do you see this conflict going from here over the next coming weeks?
I would argue that this is what war with Iran looks like. This is what a broader regional war looks like. We have to remember that on 2 occasions, Iran has attacked Israel. And April 13th, and then, of course, last Tuesday with the ballistic missile launch. So 1 year later, Israel is not only facing Hamas, they're facing Hezbollah, they're facing the Houthis, and they're facing Hamas. And Iraqi militias launched a drone strike that killed 2 Israeli soldiers and injured, I think, 22. So Israel is still fighting this war, and yet it's still being asked to stop. It's being asked to stop going after the terrorists that killed 1,400 people on October 7th, to include 40 Americans, took 257 hostages, to include 10 Americans. 100 hostages are still unaccounted for or still in Hamas's hands. And the IDF, or the Israeli government, estimates that 50% of them are dead.
There has been some speculation that the Israeli Defense Force could launch a major attack on the anniversary of October 7th. What do you expect will happen in the coming days?
One of the strongest voices out of Israel, of course, there's Benjamin Netanyahu, but there's also Naftali Bennett. And he has opposed Netanyahu on Netanyahu's strategy over the last year. But in this case, he's actually pushing Netanyahu to take a harder stance. And that his voice is more important than Biden's voice, telling him not to. And what Naftali Bennett is saying is that Israel needs to go after Iran's nuclear sites. It needs to go after its oil infrastructure. It needs to go after key leadership. And I do expect that to happen. This is the 1-year anniversary, so I don't think the IDF is going to do it today, but it probably will do it before the next Jewish holidays that are coming up in the next. Well, I think it starts October 11th. So between today and October 11th, we're likely to see an Israeli response, one that will target infrastructure, key leadership, and military facilities, something the U.S. has not done. So this will be significant. It will be decisive, and Israel's just waiting. But I do expect it to happen over the next, probably the next 5 days.
American President Joe Biden has said he doesn't support strikes in Iran's nuclear facilities. Has Netanyahu lost the support of his allies in the war?
Well, he doesn't, unfortunately. I mean, when you hear language out of the White House, don't hit Iran's nuclear sites, when we're supposed to be hell-bent on stopping Iran from getting nuclear weapons, it doesn't make sense. The real question is, will Israel actually be able to target them effectively? And we don't know. They have the capability to make them inaccessible. They have the capability to conduct offensive cyber attacks, to go after key leaders. And we'll see what happens over the next 5 days. But I do expect there to be it to be a significant attack, and Israel is doing it alone. Unfortunately, I do hear in back channels that we will refuel their aircraft in flight if they need that capability. Israel doesn't know who's going to win this election, so they're going to do whatever they can ahead of this election to ensure that they're in a more stable place. So if Harris wins, I fully expect Israel to continue all the way to January 20th, using all of its influence with Biden that it can possibly put in place to ensure that Israel continues to get supplied. If Trump wins, then that'll be different, because Trump's language has been very supportive of Israel, and they may accelerate operations, or they may wait until Trump becomes president and continues. So it's unfortunate that an ally has to wait to see the outcome of a U.S. election to see whether or not they can fight a common enemy, which I think is pathetic.
Thank you so much for your insights today, Michael.
All right, thank you. Have a good one.